Hi, I'm Chris Clement. On behalf of myself and my co-chair, Shunichi Yamashita, I welcome you to the closing session of the ICRP International Conference on Recovery After Nuclear Accidents, Radiological Protection Lessons from Fukushima and Beyond. In this session, we're focusing on future challenges and have a number of speakers. We're a little bit behind time, so we'll get right to it. So I'd like to give the floor to Tashiro Sensei from Hiroshima University. Tashiro Sensei, you have the floor. I think
I
you're
hope
muted.
now you can hear me. Sorry.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I would like to start my presentation now. Okay. それでは、広島大学の原
I
爆放
am
射
Tashiro from Research Institute for Radiation Biology and Medicine of Hiroshima University. Thank you so much for inviting me at this wonderful conference. And this last session is an important one, future challenges. I am honored to talk here. So I'll give my research perspective. So especially, I'm going to talk about the radiology and also biology and medicine that I specialize in. This is the development of malignant tumors after atomic bomb. So in 1945, when atomic bomb was dropped, and for about 4 years on, we see leukemia patient, and at 10 years, we see thyroid cancer and breast cancer, solid cancer incidents. So the radiation and cancer, the relation is clearly shown from this research on the victims. Another important thing is this is the dose-response relation of solid cancer, and there's a good correlation here. As you can see, 0.151.0 gray, as you have higher dose, there is higher incidence of cancer. However, at the low dose, under 0.5 gray, so at low dose, how can we evaluate the relationship? There is nothing that can be said for sure. Looking at Chernobyl accident, cancer also became a problem, especially pediatric thyroid cancer. This is the gray, and this is the odds ratio, and there has been a relation pointed out. These are the children exposed at Belarus. Average is 0.56 mean dose for children. This is Fukushima. From the experience of Chernobyl, we were worried about the children's thyroid cancer. So the thyroid dose was measured. Thyroid dose was carried out. Hiroshima University sent out the emergency survey team. Here, I also participated. This is in Idate village, how we are measuring. So this is the result. We measured 1,000 children, And we found out it was a very low dose. However, when we conducted Fukushima Health Management Survey, we used the ultrasound to conduct a thyroid examination. And there has been already presentations from various speakers at this conference. We found out that there were several cases of thyroid cancer among children. Were those thyroid cancer caused by radiation, or was it because of the number of screening? The residents became worried. So when you think about these things, at the radiation disasters, you have to think of two kinds of risks, as I pointed out by many speakers. One is radiation risk, cancer, and genetical risk on the left-hand side. But in order to mitigate radiation risks, you are evacuated, you don't go outside. So there is the physical risk and psychological risk and societal, economical risk, discrimination, and so on. How do we look at this balance? It's very important. If you think about it, COVID-19, we can see the similar risks. Do we look at the physiological risk, or do we look at like the testing risks? Let's go back to radiation. So from medical or biological perspective, why is cancer caused by radiation? That mechanism is being studied. And right now, what we know is through radiation, DNA is damaged. And if you cannot repair the damage, then there is chromosomal abnormalities or sudden change in DNA, and that will cause cancer. So currently, a lot of studies are in the domain of epidemiology. So it occupies a big part in the research. But recently, the DNA damage or the repair and the resulting chromosomal abnormalities, these are now easier to study. These are the atomic survivors who were eradicated at very close distance. As you can see, many chromosomes, you can see abnormalities. So distance from the center, you can see they were very close to the center. So the radiation dose and the number of abnormal chromosomes, that's being studied. Chromosomal abnormalities, by evaluating, it's used in the evaluating the chromosomal abnormalities and the dose. On the other hand, from the exposure perspective, it's a hospital where we have people who have been eradicated because hospitals use radiation like CT. CT has seen advancement in technology and it's very quick. So CT is being used in children a lot, and for adults, CT is used in screening cancer. So the use of CT scan is indispensable for medicine. However, is there effect of CD radiation on health of people? That is not yet clear. Here, this radiation exposure from CT scans in childhood as subsequent risks of leukemia and brain tumors. But this kind of epidemiological study, because there are so many factors, it's difficult to really see the relation between the two. So, because there's a limit to epidemiology, we want to overcome that limit. We look at the biological approach. So the target is the hospital radiation, because we know who's being eradicated and how much radiation the person has been exposed to. So in medical exposure, there are medical benefits. The benefit is huge. You can get accurate diagnosis, or you can get screening of cancer. However, on the other hand, there are radiation risks which are still unknown. So we are using a new approach, biological approach, to find out the risks. However, the problem is the chromosome analysis is very difficult and it's time consuming. So what we did was we applied FISH analysis with centromere and telomere. So you can see the colors on chromosome, which leads to chromosome aberrations. And by introducing these machineries, we can speedily find out the karyotyping. We looked at 60 non-cancer patients. We looked before the CT and after CT. So there is significant increase in the disc ring. Here at 0, before the test, before CT, the number of chromosome abnormalities, if it's small, then you can see it has increased. But some people have chromosomal abnormalities, a high degree, then the degree has not changed even after CT. So there are differences. So we now saw healthy volunteers. Here there are also two groups. People who had low chromosome abnormalities, we saw an increase. But people who had high abnormalities, there's not much increase. So besides chromosome abnormalities, we looked at DNA. DNA is damaged or cut off by radiation. We looked at histone protein, gamma X2X. Here, gamma 2X tends to concentrate where the DNA is damaged. So we looked at the number of focus, and there is correlation between the radiation dose and excess gamma 2X. So we looked at the gamma 2A before and after CT scan. As you can see on the right-hand side, before CT, after CT, gamma H2X focus has increased. And day after the CT, the gamma 2 H2X number is same as before. So gamma 2HX is formed at the DNA cut place. So next day, it's already been repaired. So by using gamma H2X and chromosome, we can detect the effect of radiation. So now for lung cancer screening, we looked at the low dose, which is used for that screening. For people who have high risk of lung cancer, like heavy smokers, by going through this low dose screening, the death rate will decrease by 20%, reported from US and Europe. However, we do not know the effect of low dose CT to chromosome. So we looked at gamma H2AX. These are the low dose CT. There's not much relation. However, this is a standard. 3 times the low dose radiation. Here you can see a lot of gamma H2X focus. And same result for the number of chromosome aberrations here. Before the CT, after CT, no significant increase. Here, standard dose. You can see a clear increase in the chromosome aberrations. So by using such a new methods, I think it's very effective. Here's a summary. After the Fukushima low dose irradiation, it became a concern. But there's also the medical exposure. So we would like an important approach, multiple biological approach, high throughput analysis system. By developing this system, we can contribute to obtain more information about the health effect of low dose irradiation. So one of that technique is FISH technique, and another is gamma H2AX. So medical exposure, here it's clear that there is huge medical benefit, but still it's important to evaluate the radiation risk. And as I've been repeating, in medical exposure, we know the dose, clear dose, amount of dose. And another important thing is we know the health condition of the patient. So in this kind of study, we can apply this new biodosimetry techniques. And the knowledge derived from this kind of study we can apply in the future. Here, all the people who contributed to this research. Thank you.
Arigato gozaimasu, Tashiro Sensei, for your very detailed presentation about some very important aspects of dose and risk, particularly for low-dose radiation exposure. If there are questions, please add them to the chat feature on a Q&A feature in Zoom, or you can present them on the website again later. Next, we'll move on to Nobuhiko Ban. He is a commissioner of the Nuclear Regulation Authority of Japan. He's presenting today on what is at stake. Ban-sensei, please go ahead.
I am Nobuhiko Ban, a commissioner of the Nuclear Regulation Authority. I would like to thank organizers for giving me this opportunity. The task assigned to me is to discuss future challenges of the recovery after nuclear accidents from a policy perspective. The subject is beyond my official responsibility. So I will give this presentation not as a member of the regulatory body, but as one of experts in radiological protection. What I am going to talk is my personal opinion and not an official view of my organization or the government. I want to discuss the issue of recovery based on three key questions. The first question is the same as the presentation title: what is at stake? The second one is more fundamental: what is recovery? And finally, who does what? Let me start with the first question. As you may have already heard, ICRP organized a series of fora for dialogue with concerned parties on the rehabilitation of living conditions in the aftermath of the Fukushima Daiichi accident. In the fora called ICRP Dialogue, one question was asked many times: what is at stake? Just looking at the apparent facts at that time, it sounds somewhat strange. It was obvious that the source of the problem was radioactive contamination. Various protective measures were taken against it, including detailed radiation monitoring, decontamination program to reduce the radiation level in the living environment, and activities related to radiation risk communication. But still, the question was repeatedly asked: what is at stake? This reality prompts us to rethink our view on the situation that people of Fukushima encountered. In case of nuclear emergency, residents living near the site could be exposed to high doses of radiation. Therefore, preventing or mitigating adverse radiation effects is a main focus of emergency response. Immediate actions such as evacuation are taken depending on the situation. Following the urgent response, restrictions may be imposed on people's life to prevent inadvertent exposure. But the restrictive measures are accepted for the sake of safety. In this way, safety, especially radiation safety, is emphasized in emergency response. But even if society as a whole agree on this scheme, the implications of safety are probably different between experts and the public. Nuclear and radiation experts play a central role in planning and implementing the emergency response. For these experts, ensuring safety is a top priority, and they do their best to keep radiation doses reasonably low. On the other hand, for the public. To be safe is an implicit assumption to have a normal life. In ordinary times, they take it for granted to be safe and do not pay special attention to safety. So, if they need to change the way of living for the sake of safety, it would be troublesome. Indeed, after the Fukushima Daiichi accident, life became different for people in the affected areas. The changes in the living environment brought them various difficulties, including health concern, stigmatization, community severance, and so on. All these problems stemmed from radiation safety consideration. There is no doubt that the root cause was radioactive contamination, but people's life was disrupted pretty much by focusing on radiation exposure and protective measures against it. Under such circumstances, people were at a loss what to do. Many issues came together, and they lost their perspective. That is why the same question was repeated. What is at stake? Then let's move on to the second question. What is recovery? To think about what recovery is, we need to know what issues arise after a nuclear accident. When the accident of Fukushima Daiichi occurred, I was not an exception who paid attention solely to radiation exposure. But later, I learned there were so many problems. They include issues of the place to live, employment, nursing care, child rearing, education, and even motivation in life. Broadly speaking, it was just like what was common and easily done in normal times suddenly became something special and difficult to achieve. Summarizing what I have learned, in the post-accident situation, not only new problems arise, but also existing problems are accelerated or reignited. For example, sales of farm produce from Fukushima dropped after the accident, and farmers have suffered from harmful rumors since then. This is a new problem brought about by the accident. At the same time, the situation seems to have accelerated an existing problem, decrease in farm population in the area. From this perspective, it is not hard to imagine various pending issues erupt all of a sudden in the wake of an accident. But no two are the same. What matters will vary among communities, families, and individuals. That means specific measures for recovery need to be considered on a case-by-case basis. Having said that, there should be something, a common struggle. I think it may be what we are currently experiencing in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. Our daily life has changed a lot since the beginning of this pandemic. Now we know it is not just a matter of public health, but to strike a balance between infection control measures and our social activities. The situation following the nuclear accident may be basically the same. I mean, the core of the problem is disturbance in the balance of life. Our life consists of many activities, and materials necessary for each activity. We keep balance between them almost unconsciously, as it is routine practice. But when affected by external force strong enough to disturb the balance, we get upset and struggle to find a new equilibrium point. If that is the case, recovery is to restore the balance of disrupted life at all levels in the affected area. We should be aware it is not as easy as it sounds. Just imagine you are a farmer ordered to relocate, have nothing to do in a small makeshift house. In such a case, it is not just restoring the balance, but starting life all over again. That is why the recovery takes time and why elderly people tend to be left behind. There will be no true recovery without resolving inner struggles, and we cannot specify an end date for this reason. Now I go on to the last question. Who does what? Nuclear accidents and subsequent responses can cause disruption of life in many ways. A wide range of measures will be necessary. And as I mentioned, specific measures for recovery need to be considered on a case-by-case basis. On the other hand, addressing the respective issues separately may not be effective. This is not only because an issue-by-issue approach may lead to a sort of sectionalism, but also because all problems are linked to one another in each individual, family, or community. Therefore, it is desirable to involve various stakeholders and mobilize their knowledge and skills to address the difficult situation as a whole. You may think it is a multidisciplinary approach. In fact, in radiological protection, multiple disciplines such as medicine, biology, epidemiology, physics, and engineering are integrated to assess and control radiation exposure. But in my impression, individual experts stay within the bound of their own specialties, and the scope is too limited to address the reality of post-accident situations. What I am proposing is a transdisciplinary approach. Rather than handling problems within each individual discipline, all available knowledge and skills are mobilized to tackle the difficult situation. In this approach, your status or title doesn't matter, and distinctions between disciplines have little significance. What we call co-expertise may be regarded as a simple form of the transdisciplinary approach. You may have heard about concrete examples of this concept somewhere in this conference. To put it simply, it is an approach in which people of the affected areas work with experts and authorities to evaluate the situation. It should be emphasized that people are not a recipient of support, but actively involve themselves as a stakeholder on an equal footing. Active involvement is key because it may help people get a better grip on the situation and adjust the way of living on their own. then we cannot turn away from a simple but harsh reality. That is, true recovery is nothing less than regaining control of one's life, and it can only be achieved by his or her own will. Our question should be how to better support those struggling people. Living in a country which is prone to natural disasters, we Japanese often refer to the three-layered help model in the context of disaster preparedness. The three layers are public help, mutual help, and self-help that corresponds to efforts at the levels of society, community, and individual. By applying this model, I try to find a direction of systematic support for the recovery after nuclear accidents. Public help is necessary to prepare the environment for recovery. Typically, it is programs directed by the government or relevant authorities, such as large area radiation monitoring and the development of necessary infrastructures. As I mentioned, the ultimate recovery, in the sense of regaining control of each individual's life, rests with self-help. But at the same time, it is important to remember that self-help does not mean to survive on one's own. The passage of time is different from person to person, particularly after a significant event like nuclear accident. Some people can adapt to the new normal quite soon, while others do not. Any individual should not be abandoned on the pretext of self-help. In this regard, mutual help is important to prevent individuals from being isolated. It provides eyes to watch over the people who need longer time to recover. Of course, the function of mutual help goes far beyond that. In a community whose members live in the same environment and have a similar lifestyle, it will be easy to share common problems. If such relationship develops into some form of collaborative activity, it will provide a platform for co-expertise. Finally, it is clear that mutual help is a vital component in ensuring the flexibility and sustainability of efforts for recovery. Considering its importance, supporting communities behind the scene will be a part of public help. Let me summarize today's talk. I have discussed the issue of recovery from nuclear accidents with emphasis on disruption of life. In that context, recovery is to restore the balance of life, which is disturbed by the accident and subsequent response. But it is not as easy as it sounds. In some cases, it is almost like starting life over, which is a tough challenge and may take a long time. I also tried to find a direction of systematic support for recovery by applying the three-layered help model. Among three layers of this model, public help plays a role to improve the necessary environment for recovery. On the other hand, ultimate recovery rests with self-help in the sense of regaining control of each individual's life. Finally, mutual help plays a crucial part and due consideration should be given to how we can support communities over the long term. Thank you for your attention.
Arigato gozaimasu, Ban Sensei, for your presentation that shows us that the answers to some fundamental and seemingly simple questions are not so simple, and at the same time shedding some light on elements that might help us understand these questions better. Next, we move on to a presentation looking at the societal aspects perspective, in particular after the Chernobyl accident. This presentation will be by Jean-Christophe Niel, who is Director General of IRSN in France. Jean-Christophe, please go ahead.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, even good night, wherever you are on the planet. I am Jean-Christophe Niel, Director General from the French Institute for Radioprotection and Nuclear Safety. IRSN is a public expert in charge of assessing radiological and nuclear risk associated with the use of ionizing radiation. An important mission of IRSN is to provide expertise and recommendations to national authorities in case a nuclear accident threatens or occurs. Even if we will never be fully ready to face a nuclear accident, we must develop continuous effort to improve preparedness to such situations. It must cover both the emergency and recovery phases. In the past, we focused on preparedness for emergency phase. Major accidents, Chernobyl, Fukushima, but also chemical ones, show that once the facility is stabilized and the releases are over, the accident is not finished. Consistently, much effort are devoted today to improve preparedness on post-accident recovery. Within this context, all the topics addressed during this conference are key. I would like to thank the ICRP for offering me the opportunity to give some views on a central aspect of the post-accidental recovery. I mean the societal aspects. Indeed, in the end, nuclear accident is about people, their lives, and the territories they live in. Actors involved in one way or another should never forget this, especially the radiological protection experts. Many societal aspects have been addressed and well illustrated during the different sessions of this conference. Japanese and foreign experts share their experience, feedback and observations following Chernobyl and Fukushima accident. Not surprisingly, I will be back on several of these aspects during this presentation. Experience from Chernobyl and Fukushima accidents evidence the complexity of a post-accidental situation. It was very well illustrated by many speakers this week. For the affected people, this complexity comes from the fact that daily life is affected in all its dimensions: family, social relations, and social activities, health, job. It is also due to the fact that it is a long-lasting situation due to the radioactive contamination of the environment. From this point of view, it is quite different from a natural disaster. Addressing this complexity and the associated multidimensional aspect is a challenge. It is a societal challenge for the recovery management process. And as a consequence, it is a challenge for the actors, national and local authorities, experts, professionals, NGOs. To face this challenge in the less bad situation, it is important to learn from Chernobyl and Fukushima experiences and draw experience feedback in order to increase preparedness. A key point is that the affected population must be at the center of the concern and be fully part of it. The recovery management process must be built always having in and keeping in mind the human and societal dimensions of the situation. My presentation is based on observations and studies performed by IRSN and French and Japanese partners, CEPN, universities, on the basis of many interactions, including ICRP dialogues, with a large variety of Japanese stakeholders, affected inhabitants, NGOs, mayors, authorities. The complexity of the situation appears at two levels. at the individual and family level and at the community level. At the individual level, the situation creates a major and long-lasting disruption in the daily life and therefore in the quality of life and well-being. Essential needs are partially or totally affected. Attention has to be paid to the safety of food. Environment represents a danger due to ambient contamination. Relations within the family are affected due to the variety of the reactions of family members. Social relations are also disrupted, and tension may arise due to different choices of life. Some stays, some leaves. Education, healthcare, and jobs are jeopardized due to the disruption of educative health and economic system. The inhabitants face a difficult dilemma. If they are still in the affected territory, should I stay or should I leave? If they evacuated, forced or voluntarily, should I return or not? Whatever the situation, there is no simple answer to these questions. When looking at the community level, the complexity of the situation encompasses several facets. The social life is disrupted, and the cohesion of the community is weakened or lost due to the multiplicity of the decisions that are taken. For example, neighbors, friends, or working colleagues decide to leave when I choose to stay, or the contrary. The loss of cohesion can also be caused by inequity. For example, the compensatory system does not allocate the same compensation to inhabitants affected in a similar manner, but living apart from each other by a theoretical dose limit or administrative limit. The disruption in the economic life is a major issue. Indeed, in addition to the possible loss of jobs, essential services like groceries, shops, public services are severely affected and are not anymore provided. Last but not least, the situation creates a loss of confidence in the national authorities and experts. In this situation, the local authorities, mainly the mayors, play a major role as they are close to the people and share with them the difficulties. This role is also a very difficult role. They are torn between two imperatives, the central government policies and the regional needs and requests. The measure appears to crystallize tension between centralized decision at state level and the local and divergent concerns of the villagers. What are the recovery requirements for affected population? A first prerequisite for recovery is the possibility for the affected people and communities to understand and assess the radiological situation. It is difficult regarding the complexity and uncertainties of the situation, regarding the fact that contamination is not visible, and regarding technical and scientific understanding. Measurements and the possibility to perform and understand them at the individual level are key to handle one's life. From this first step, it will be possible for the affected people to build and implement practical actions that, in the initial phase, will focus on a better protection, a better radiological protection. A second requirement is the capacity of local actors to build a response to this totally new, unexpected, and unprecedented situation. It will depend on the capacity to build new forms of cooperation with all the stakeholders, authorities, experts, professionals, in a context of loss of confidence. It supposes to have a grip on the radiological situation by being directly involved in the decisions that lead to actions and measures for reducing exposure. For the authorities, experts, professionals, NGOs, what are the main issues and challenges? The first challenge is to tackle the situation considering all the facets of the problem. Each authority or expert will have the tendency to see and manage the situation through its own specialty and experience. For example, radioprotection expert will focus on levels, thresholds, exposure, protective action without consideration of the other issues. This can lead to situations where local committees, public authorities, and experts produce response paths that can be conflicting. Actors should learn to think and act in a multi-actor system of information and action. The second challenge is related to the information provided to the affected population. It's important to separate facts and values. The point is crucial when dealing with low-dose exposure. Experts should clearly differentiate between what is certain and what is more uncertain or reliable. Indeed, people must be given the means to make their own decision. Just looking for reassuring spur distrust. The question of equity and the fact of providing equitable support is a duty. Confronted to a given unexpected and unwanted situation, it exists a variety of reactions, and each of them should be respected. As seen previously, tension may appear among the members of the community due to different individual choices. The various external actors should not exacerbate these possible divisions. They should do their best to preserve the cohesion of the community by not taking a side for one group or another. In summary and overall, the major point is the respect of choices of individuals and communities. As shown on the previous slide, the recovery process is a societal process. It has been illustrated in the aftermath of Chernobyl and Fukushima accident and in many presentations this week. It implies that the individual and community's engagement is a major stake in the recovery management process. In all areas of concern, for example, decontamination operations, waste storage, lifting of evacuation, revitalizations, establishing a dialogue among all the parties involved is a necessity to elaborate decision-making outcomes. Decisions should be taken based on multiple trade-offs that incorporates the views of all stakeholders affected by the situation. Local authorities, mayors, for their proximity of the people and with the situation, have a major role to play in this respect. A major and difficult role acknowledging the difficulty to address conflicting expectations from the members and the community, for example, between some who would like to return and some who do not want to be back, and others who would like to wait before taking their decision. No one, no organization has the answer to the countless questions that arise from such a situation. From that point of view, the support of local initiatives, of local actors and professionals is essential. For example, by organizing small groups meeting to make, analyze, and understand measurements in order to improve self-protection. Due to the time frame of a nuclear accident, emergency, transition, recovery phase, the implication of local actors evolve as the recovery stakes unfold with time. During the initial recovery phase, just following the emergency one, the main goal of authorities is the protection of population with a focus on health and association radioprotection criteria. During this phase, the role of citizens is progressively increasing in the management of the situation. Risk evaluation, risk communication, and protective actions are, during this phase, driven by public organizations. Nevertheless, for the sake of trust, this activity should involve experts chosen by local authorities. It is the case in several municipalities in the Fukushima prefecture in the aftermath of the accident. The technology allows it easily. Direct measurements by citizens should be encouraged, supported, or implemented. As time goes, close interaction between various stakeholders and the affected citizens is needed to take and implement decisions aiming at restoring human quality of life through multi-dimensional actions. Radiological protection is only one element among others. Decisions by the people themselves, by the authorities, should not be driven only by radioactivity. In the event of a nuclear accident, regarding its missions, IRSN is a public organization that would provide recommendations. As responsible for IRSN, I will now discuss one of the challenges that radio protection experts have to tackle with during the recovery management process. I mean the engagement of a dialogue with the affected individuals and communities. What is common to the experiences gained from Chernobyl and Fukushima is the context of distrust regarding authorities and institutional experts. One reason for distrust of institutional experts is probably linked to the feeling within the population that these experts were providing top-down information and that they didn't take into account the interests and vulnerability of the populations. Experts that were personally committed, chosen by the population through the action of the mayor, that were listening to the expectations and concerns of the population, concerns that can be different from expert concern, were well perceived by the population and were of great help. We had some testimonies of these experts referred as local councillors during this conference. An important point concerns the communication about radiological risks. The communication must not be aimed at reassuring people in a context of uncertainties. The communication must be consistent with the state of scientific knowledge and humble regarding the uncertainties and the limit of knowledge. The vulnerability of people in this dramatic situation must be taken into account. Experience also demonstrates the importance to support local initiatives by individuals and groups of citizens. It should apply especially to initiatives to understand and assessing the radiological situation. Experts should share and transfer their knowledge and promote initiatives, for example, campaign of measurements, control of food. Finally, radioprotection experts should not work isolated in their own field on expertise and should share with experts on other fields, health, food safety, socio-economic actors. Indeed, recovery management should be based on an holistic approach in order to avoid conflicting action with experts from other fields or authorities. Feedback from both Chernobyl and Fukushima have shown that a way for radioprotection experts to engage a sustainable dialogue with affected population and communities was the implementation of co-expertise processes. The co-expertise process aims at involving the affected population and other stakeholders in the management of the radiological situation to improve both their protection, radioprotection culture, and their living conditions. 4 steps can be identified in the co-expertise process between affected populations and experts. Establish a dialogue by identifying problems and challenges encountered by population. Engaging affected people in measurements in their living place to make visible what is invisible. That is to capture how they are exposed and to share the results at the community level. The third step is to identify and implement protective actions. The last step is to organize citizen vigilance and implement projects aiming at restoring sustainable livability in the community. Co-expertise process relies on the access of individuals to measurements and the possibility to share them. It is facilitated by the technological development of very simple, easy-to-handle means of measurements. For example, the Day Shuttle device in Japan and the development of connected solutions. The involvement of radiological protection experts in the post-accidental recovery process in the affected territories must rely on ethical principles. To my mind and for radioprotection experts, the main one is the respect of autonomy and freedom of the affected population and communities. That means to rely on voluntary involvement, to be transparent, especially on risk communication. Here is what we know from science, here is what we don't know or what is uncertain. No judgment is to be made on the individual choices and decisions. It implies to support all affected people without exception, even if they are not in the mainstream. To be accountable on both discourses and action. In the end, what is to be learned from Chernobyl and Fukushima accidents with respect to societal perspective, and how to use it to improve preparedness and resilience? Involving the people and the communities in preparedness is as important as planning resources and institutional mechanisms. Complexity and multidimensional aspects of the situation must be tackled with through cooperation between the various stakeholders. Indeed, preparedness must involve all the actors, including people. It must not be limited to radio protection experts. The issue is not how the people trust the experts, but how the experts trust the people. As a consequence, experts in radio protection have to be prepared to stakeholder involvement approaches, in particular in co-expertise processes. In the end, the recovery is made by people, and their capacity to think and act together is as important as individual capacity of action. I would like to thank once more ICRP for inviting me to give this speech. I would like to thank Claire Cousin for her outstanding chairwomanship that makes ICRP an even stronger and more transparent organization for the sake of radio protection. So long, Claire.
Merci beaucoup, Jean-Christophe, for your presentation focusing on many complex societal aspects after Chernobyl and Fukushima both. With this, we've now had 3 overarching presentations talking about very important areas to be considered in recovery after large nuclear accidents, which sets the stage for the next speaker. It's my pleasure to introduce Shunichi Yamashita, chair of this conference, who will give the declaration from the conference. Yamashita Sensei, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. 共同座長のクリス、ありがとうございます。
Thank you so much to the co-chair, Chris. So, overcoming the difficulty of having this online conference, we're now at the final stages. So, I'm honored to give this declaration of international conference. I have been engaged in the radiation medicine in Chernobyl for 10 years and in 30 years ago, and now at Fukushima for 10 years. I would like to extend my appreciation for this. Can we have the first slide of the declaration, please? Declaration. Declaration of International Conference on Recovery After Nuclear Accidents, Radiological Protection Lessons from Fukushima and Beyond. This conference was organized by International Commission on Radiological Protection and hosted by the Japan Atomic Energy Agency. This conference brought together online scientists, experts, authorities, professionals, and citizens from around the world from December 1st to 4th, 2020. And also high school students. More than 2,200 people from more than 100 countries have registered, and more than 130 contributions were presented. So the long list of Japanese and many other organizations supporting and cooperating with this conference, which you can see on the website, and the interest of so many people from around the world demonstrates and manifests the importance of this subject. This conference allowed many people to share their personal and professional experiences of recovery after the nuclear accident and to better understand the complex issues at stake and to be better prepared for the future accidents. It also allowed intergovernmental bodies to present their views, including International Atomic Energy Agency, Nuclear Energy Agency, and OECD of the OECD and UN Scientific Committee on Effects of Atomic Radiation and World Health Organization. One important objective of this conference was to improve the understanding of state of recovery in Japan. Everything is recorded, so I will not go into it. So it's also in the analysis of the ICRP. Let me talk about some of the topics of this conference. So one important objective of this conference was to improve the understanding of the state of the recovery. Let me start by summarizing the conference. It's been nearly 10 years since the Fukushima accident took place, and it has been a difficult time. But headway has been made in many areas. The situation at nuclear power station is stabilized. There has been significant progress with decommissioning. In public domain, large areas have been decontaminated. Most evacuation orders have been lifted and essential services have been restored to support those who have returned to their homes. However, many unknowns and obstacles are still ahead of those who have decided to live and work in the affected areas, not the least of which is discrimination. And the situation is not easy for those who have been evacuated and have decided for various reasons not to return. In addition, some difficult return areas remain. The protective actions implemented rapidly by the authorities kept exposure levels of those affected low enough that direct radiation-induced effects have not been observed so far and are unlikely to be observed in the future. However, there remain some uncertainties and many people remain concerned about the possible effects in the future, especially in children and pregnant women. Beyond the potential direct effects of radiation, lifestyle disruptions have had a noticeable impact in terms of increasing certain common pathologies as well as on the psyche of those affected in Fukushima, ranging from resignation, apathy to anxiety and even depression. Psychological impact of accident has a lasting effect on the quality of life of many people. In this context, marked by both uncertainty and disruption of physical and mental well-being of population, it was suggested that inclusive health surveillance in the affected areas, including Fukushima Health Management Survey, must remain long-term priority for public authorities. Recovery at the Fukushima plant site is under close supervision with a detailed medium-long-term roadmap. The dismantling work is progressing steadily, supported by a huge research development effort in the field of remote operating equipment due to the high level of residual dose. A major challenge of decommissioning in the near future is the management of water that has been accumulated over the years in order to avoid its discharge to the environment. After treatment to significantly reduce the radioactivity in the water, two chemical solutions have been proposed: release into atmosphere through evaporation and dilution in the ocean. Japanese experts have studied these approaches and concluded that neither would lead to adverse impacts on human health or the environment. However, there are many points of view and concerns about economic and social impacts. Given this, it was suggested that the public authorities support a transparent, pluralist, and collaborative decision-making progress to be initiated without delay. As mentioned on several occasions, a significant difficulty for the inhabitants of Fukushima today is the absence of a shared vision of the future beyond the common understanding of radiation risks. This makes it difficult to discuss the situation and find ways to overcome the remaining challenges. Most people know that the authorities are fully engaged in the recovery process and that they have a plan, but there is also a shared feeling that not being associated with its development and implementation, this plan cannot meet their expectations. A large nuclear accident can cause a breakdown in society, affecting all aspects of individual and community life. Significant. So our conference also aimed to help this post-nuclear aspects. So I will introduce you to some of the topics towards the new future. So large nuclear accidents can cause a breakdown in society, affecting all aspects of individual and community life. Significant health consequences are possible depending on the nature of the accident, but even if not, there are widespread and long-lasting societal, environmental, and economic consequences, all of which are challenging to deal with given the complexity of the situation. This highlights the need for preparedness involving stakeholders before an accident. The new ICRP publication 146, Radiological Protection of People and the Environment in the Event of Large-Scale Nuclear Accident, developed over nearly a decade in cooperation with experts from around the world, reflects lessons based on the direct experiences of authorities, operators, and affected people. Although there are undoubtedly more lessons yet to be learned, its purpose is to present recommendations and guidance on response to and preparedness for nuclear accidents with significant release to the environment. Experience from both Fukushima and Chernobyl accidents show that additional radioactivity will persist in the environment long after a major nuclear accident, decreasing progressively through deliberate actions and natural processes. This implies that public authorities must maintain some actions for years and even decades after the accident to continue to protect residents and communities. They also must implement new measures to support the latter and the improvement of living conditions of people in the affected areas. The conference highlighted that the essential actions of public authorities should not overshadow the central place of affected people in the recovery process. They are all concerned in one way or another by the situation, and they all aspire to regain serenity, both evacuees and those who have decided to stay or return. The expectation is to return to their usual business and managing their daily concerns, even if taking into account the presence of radioactivity that remains as part of their usual routine. The experiences of several communities in Fukushima, like others previously in Chernobyl, have shown that it is possible to involve affected people in the recovery process so that they can regain control of their personal situation. Cooperation between experts, authorities, local professionals, and the affected people What we ICRP call co-expertise process is a proven approach to develop practical radiological protection culture, giving people decision-making autonomy to protect themselves and their loved ones. Experience has also shown that radiological protection is not an end in itself and must be used to improve living conditions in affected areas, whether it concerns individual well-being or the quality of living together. This improvement can only be achieved through the combined commitment of public authorities, communities, and the affected people themselves to support individual and collective projects that emerge as a result of recovery process. This support must take place within a framework of governance of societal economic activities based on inclusiveness, transparency, accountability, vigilance, and equity. This is a matter of human dignity and ethical duty. More than 3 decades after the Chernobyl accident and almost a decade after the Fukushima accident, it is clear that the recovery process is a long journey which necessarily involves several generations. In this context, the memory of the accident is not only commemorative, but also serves as a living reminder to raise awareness in the next generation, to maintain everyone's vigilance, and to contribute to building the future. The involvement of the education system in schools and universities is a crucial way to pass the experience on to the next generation and maintain the spirit of recovery. This transmission of experience is also the fuel of recovery preparedness in the event of nuclear accident in the future, the possibility of which cannot be excluded despite all efforts to avoid them. Past experience in the areas affected by the Chernobyl accident and more recently in the areas affected by the Fukushima accident has shown that it is through dialogue with all stakeholders that it is possible to reconcile the diverging point of view that, given the complexity of the recovery situation, inevitably exists concerning the future of the living together in the affected areas. It is also through dialogue that all concerned can build a shared vision for the future, identify the values and principles that will drive protective actions and other societal, environmental, cultural, and economic revitalization projects, and work together to achieve this vision. So this is exactly what ICRP has been doing on site. So ICRP, that was the communique from the ICR conference. Thank you to all the presentators for giving us wonderful presentation. It's 10 years almost from Fukushima accident. I hope that the fruit of this conference will be applied to the recovery and also to the happiness of the residents. Thank you to the participants and especially to the core members of this conference and to the Secretariat.
Arigato gozaimasu, Yamashita Sensei, for being the chair of this this
Thank you so much to
and for delivering the declaration on behalf of the conference itself. With this, we now move to the closing addresses. First, I would like to introduce Koichi Noda, who is an executive director of JAEA, Noda Sensei, the floor is yours.
よろしいですか。はい。それでは、忙しい中、皆様、原子力事
Thank you, all of you, for attending this international conference despite your busy schedules. As a host on the Japan side, I am from the Japan Atomic Energy Agency, JAEA. I would like to give a closing address. This international conference has been held under the new circumstances of COVID-19, and we have made a decision to hold it online. And there were some login errors and problems with the interpretation channels. And we apologize for causing these inconveniences. We would like to use these lessons learned from our experience for future online conferences. And for all the registrants, we had more than 2,000 from more than 100 countries participate. Many people participated. I'd like to thank all of you for participating. At this international conference, we have looked at the activities of the past 10 years. And in those 10 years, there were many activities carried out. And we have been working through trial and error to form a consensus. And we have come through this international conference to recognize these past efforts. And as already presented and by Professor Yamashita on the declaration of the international conference, has highlighted the important points of this international meeting. And the contents of this international conference, we will now have to implement them going forward. And we have learned a lot from the nuclear accident, and we will be using these kind of experiences and passing them on to the next generation. And we would like to use this international conference as a platform for moving on to the next steps. And I'd like to conclude my closing address. Thank you very much for participating over a long period of time for this international conference. Thank you very much.
Arigatou gozaimasu, Noda-sama, for your closing remarks. And now I give the floor
締めの
to
字ありがとうございました。
Dr.
次は ICRP のクレア・カズンス議長にお任せしたいと思います。締めのコメントをどうぞ。おはようございます、皆様。クレア・カズンスと申します。ICRP の今議長をしております。私の方からすべての方に感謝でございます。参加者ありがとうございました。この会議に対しまして、スピーカーたち、そしてまた世界中から参加してきた方に感謝したいと思います。またホストの JAEA にも感謝でございます。すべての支援をいただいた方にも心から感謝申し上げます。
Joined us. I would again like to thank our host, JEEA, and all the other supporters, and all the people who have made this virtual meeting possible. At this point, you may wonder why I am showing you a picture of a surfer. Well, this conference has been about those who suffered following the nuclear accident in Fukushima. And I recently read an article in the press concerning this gentleman. Mr. Suzuki is 64 years old. At the time of the disaster, he lost his house, his business, which was a surf shop, and members of his family. He was determined to keep on surfing and return to his local beach on a daily basis. After 9 years, last year, the beach reopened to visitors for the first time. It's poignant because surfing is going to make its Olympic debut as a sport in the Tokyo Olympics. But Mr. Suzuki is very concerned that Fukushima is stigmatized in history forever. And obviously, this is something that we need to try and prevent. So why did we have the conference? Because nearly a decade after the Fukushima accident seemed a very good time to reflect on the lessons and experiences that everyone has learned, but also to consider what still needs to be done, because we know that there is still more. Of course, many organizations, different authorities, and individuals have worked tirelessly in the last 9 years to learn and to try and improve the lives of those affected. ICRP has certainly learned a great deal. The experiences that we have learned are now part of our new recommendations, publication 146. This is publication 146 is radiological protection of people and the environment in the event of a large nuclear accident. During the course of the conference, you have heard many stories, and in addition of people's endeavours, there have been many. What are some of the main messages that we have learned? I think one of the main ones is that we need to recognise the importance of the co-expertise process during recovery. And again, what do we mean by that? We should be sharing experiences and knowledge with those affected. We should then be promoting self-help actions and encouraging people to implement local projects to develop radiological protection culture. In practice, this means that the best approach is to work with the people who are affected and not for them. They need to be involved. Radiological protection individuals and professionals learned. We have seen that the human and ethical dimensions of nuclear accidents leave a large legacy, and it can be hoped that that will then help support those who may be affected in the future. But these dimensions go beyond our radiological protection advice and guidance. That's not enough, because these dimensions are at least as significant as the effects of radiation on people's lives. What else have we learned? We've learned that we need to encourage the self-help protection of affected communities. And as I mentioned, to develop a practical radiological protection culture. Here you see the Mother's Radiation Lab, where they are actually testing food for levels of radiation locally. We've said the story is not over for Fukushima, and of course it is not. There are many ongoing issues that still need to be dealt with. The managing of waste from the decontamination process is certainly ongoing, as is the release of treated but still radioactive water into the ocean. Many people are still not sure about returning and living in affected areas of Fukushima, and work still needs to be done. The health surveillance of the affected populations will continue for many years, and particularly of children and young people. And we know of the importance of organising how people remember the events for future generations. As we look forward beyond the decade of the events of 2011, we know that dialogue and communication with the local affected people regarding their past experience is key and essential. ICRP has certainly learnt this through its series of Fukushima dialogues. But we know that ICRP will continue to work with Japanese colleagues and the people, because as ICRP looks to its next decade, where it works to review and revise its fundamental recommendations, we know that lessons learnt from such large nuclear accidents as Fukushima will certainly form part of any revised recommendations that we subsequently publish. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Claire, for closing out this session. And usually this would also be the end of the conference, since this is the closing session. However, we're not in usual times, and this is not a usual conference. The conference will continue, in fact, for another full week. We finished with the scheduled presentations, the presentations given live. But of course, you'll be able to see the recordings of all of these very soon. There's a few now online and more coming on soon. In addition, I strongly encourage you to look at the other materials. There's well over 100 other materials presented on the website. These include many on-demand, what we call complimentary presentations from many people around the world talking about many of the aspects of recovery covered here and even more. There's a section on virtual site tours, which I encourage you to look at, which can give you a good sense of what's going on in recovery in Fukushima. There's both technical and I'd say non-technical presentations there. And there's an intriguing section called The Recovery in Images, which presents a web documentary and a few movies that cover the subject of recovery after large nuclear accidents. So with that, I close the session, but not the conference. I hope you enjoy the next 7 days where you can ask questions from the website, on the website, and hopefully get answers from many of the presenters. Thank you very much for your attention, and thanks to all of the almost 2,500 people who have registered for the conference. Goodbye.